Well, India has been ranked the most dangerous place in the world for women, according to a new poll by the Thomson Reuters Foundation that's ranked India ahead of countries like Afghanistan, Syria, Saudi Arabia and Somalia. The last survey was done in 2011. At that time, India was ranked number 7. But even after the December 16th gang rape in 2012 and the tougher anti-rape laws that followed, India is seen as becoming much more dangerous for women. So now it tops the list. On specifics in this particular survey, India actually ranks the worst on sexual violence against women, on human trafficking and other crimes like acid attacks, female genital mutilation, child marriage and so on. Well, joining us on NDTV today is Monique Vila, the CEO of the Thomson Reuters Foundation that conducted this particular survey. Ms. Vila, thank you for joining us from London this morning your time. It's actually quite incredible.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's actually quite incredible to see India on the top of this list, ahead of countries like Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, Saudi Arabia. And honestly, my first reaction to this was, really?
Yes, I mean, I must say I was also surprised by the result, because 7 years ago, when we did our first perception poll on violence against women in most of the countries in the world, India was ranked number 4. I thought that after the outcry that existed in India and in the world indeed, after the gang rape in a bus of this student 5 years ago, things would have improved, because laws have been voted and improved, and indeed women have started to speak loud when sexual harassment or rape or things happen to them. So it was quite surprising to see that in spite of all this, India, in this perception poll, comes as the worst country for women to live in, on the 3 reasons you said, which were indeed very important: human trafficking, sexual violence, and religious or cultural attitude.
But you know, before I get to the specifics on which India has been found to be wanting, really, I just want to talk a little bit about the methodology, because again, it really does seem a little hard to believe that India would rank ahead of countries like Syria and Somalia and even Saudi Arabia, where we know that as far as women's rights are concerned, it's actually laughable. Yeah. But just to ask you on the methodology, you say that the survey involved 548 respondents.
Exactly.
And you've talked about
specialists of genders and specialists in different countries. Yeah.
So why is it that we don't know who these experts are? Do we know what countries they're from, what their background is? Because it's very generic what you've given in terms of the methodology.
I can tell you, you have, sorry to interrupt you, if I can answer. You have 41 specialists based in India, but you have 548 who have also gender specialists, academics studying these questions, social workers, etc., who know well the country. So you have a lot of Indians who really answered the poll, for India as for the other countries. The fact that it is on top of the list is not that surprising, because if you think that India is the country where there is massive infanticide of girls, and you know that the gap between men and women in India is of 37 millions. So it's a lot against women. Even before you are born, you can be killed. But after, even if the statistics have grown on violence against women in the last few years, since the gang rape in the bus in Delhi, it's essentially because women now dare to go to the police to say it. But another data that has been published by the Bar Association in India is that 70% of women don't dare to say when they are sexually harassed or raped. So, you have to balance on that. And a perception poll is a photography. It's a snapshot of a situation in a country. And what is really interesting regarding India is that when we did our first poll on violence against women 7 years ago, India was number 4. At the time, it was an outcry from everybody, because everybody said it's not possible that the biggest democracy in the world is so violent against women. And 2 years after there was the gang rape, And all media outlets around the world used our poll because it was the only photography you had of a situation in a country. And you knew, indeed, since 2 years, that India was a country which is particularly violent against women, unfortunately. And even with the economic boom that since 2 or 3 decades now has seen this massive middle class coming into India, and where women have found jobs and have been respected for that as a breadwinner, etc., you still have a very patriarchal mindset in India, and especially in the older.
So may I ask you, because that's an important point, which is the patriarchal mindset that you talk about, because after the 2012 gang rape on December 16th, we had new anti-rape laws that were supposed to be quote unquote tougher. Now, obviously, that has not worked. That has not worked in at least deterring these crimes from happening.
Also because
maybe more people are reporting them. But are you saying then that this is something? I mean, what can governments do then? When you're faced with a challenge like this, what can governments do? Because this would then be very alarming for India to be at the top of this list.
I have this sense, and I have a big team in India, and I know this country quite a lot. I go twice a year, minimum every year. And I've seen, for instance, last year in Rajasthan, villages where children are taught their rights from very, very small. And the result is amazing. They really fight for their rights. And you can be sure these children will not be enslaved or anything. So you can do a lot of things. And I call that the 3E. You have to educate people. And when I say people, it's not only girls, it's boys. To tell them, you should respect girls exactly as you are. There is no reason why half of the population should not have the same right as the other half, the boys and the girls. So you have to teach that very soon. Then you have to empower women. And that is to say, give them access to property rights, give them access to land. You know that women in India only own 10% of the land in India. Women in the whole world only own 20% of the land in the world, which is not normal because we're half of the population. So India, on many of these indicators, which come from the World Bank, which come from many other national data also in India, show that there is a problem. There are many issues. So,
Ms. Vela,
education, empowerment, and
certainly just to get back on the methodology for a second. Now you talked about various experts across the board being polled for this. Now can I ask, how was this done, in the sense that was there any data that you were relying on from various countries? Was there official data that you were looking at, or is this just every individual expert's sort of perception, because it's a perception poll?
As I explained, a perception poll. I explained to you, a perception poll is something you do. It's like a snapshot of a situation in the world. In that case, March, April 2018. And in the last, it was the same in 2011. And so it's a snapshot. It's not the data of the government. I have all the data of the government. I have all the data of everything. But this doesn't give you the perception. And the perception is very important. As you could see, you discovered in 2011 that India was indeed a very dangerous country for women. You are this confirmed today, and things have not improved. Also, because when I speak of education and empowerment, I speak also of enforcement. So you take new laws, which India did indeed after the gang rape in the bus in Delhi. And these new laws have to be implemented. That is to say that the system of justice, which is a bit slow in India, as you know very well, has to really address the issue. So it's both education, empowerment, and enforcement. And I think the government has to play on these 3 levels.
Ms. Vela, what does, when you have a country like India that is then ranked as the most dangerous place on earth for women, what does that do when you do a perception poll like this? How does that affect India's, let's say, perception as an economic powerhouse, as the fastest growing economy in the world? India, how does that affect perceptions?
Yeah, indeed. India is the fastest growing economy in the world. And so India is improving by day, you know, its fight against poverty, and for empowerment. So now I think the real issue has to be to make women, give women as many opportunities as you give to men. Just imagine the potential of India if women had the same opportunities as men. It would be extraordinary. It would be in trillions of dollars. So I think this just shows the potential that India has and the urgency to address issues like violence against women, like infanticide, like child marriage. I mean, child marriage, you are the country where 27% of the Indian girls are married before the age of 18. So this is the biggest country for that. And you are 1.3 billion people. So it's on a scale that is unparalleled in other countries. Same for trafficking and slavery. India owns more than 1/3 of the slaves in the world, according to the ILO and the UN. So if you have that, how do you make that bonded labor stops, sex trafficking stops, etc.? So
right.
These are things that take time, that takes generations.
We're also just hearing that the Women and Child Development Ministry in India is actually, you know, rubbishing the report, not surprisingly, saying it doesn't match what the data on the ground doesn't match what the poll says.
Yeah, I mean, there is data and there is a perception poll. As I explained, this is very different. But the perception poll gives you an instantaneous moment in time. And, you know, the most extraordinary in this perception poll and the most surprising to me was that the US was ranked the 10th country for violence against women. And this obviously is very much the perception that specialists have around the world and in the US especially, after the Me Too campaign and after this massive outcry of women on sexual harassment, sexual violence, and also violence with the guns, etc. So you had all that together, plus a Trump administration which has completely taken as not a priority the gender question and the gender gap in the US. So of course the specialists see the US like a country where it is regressing and not progressing. So you have a lot of different perceptions. So once again, it's a perception poll. It is not data from the World Bank or from the Indian government.
Okay.
It's how 548 specialists in the world see the biggest countries in the world.
All right. Well, then there's certainly a lot for India to reflect on if India is indeed perceived as this poll says, as the most dangerous country in the world for women, ahead of countries like Somalia, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Syria.
Yes.
I mean, this is a shocker for us. I think it's a shocker.
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia is a country, indeed, where women have to have a guardian to tell them if they can travel,
exactly.
if they can open a bank account, if they can do anything with their life. I have a friend in Saudi Arabia who told me she has to ask a 12-year-old son before she travels to have his authorization. So absolutely. But in Saudi Arabia, women have access to health, women have access to finance, women have access to education. This makes that they come only 5, where India comes first. So, you know, you have to put everything in perspective. Of course, once again, India is a big democracy. India has such a big opportunity if they just want to give women the best chance and the same opportunities as men.
All right, Monique Villa, the CEO of the Thomson Reuters Foundation that conducted this perception poll. Thank you for joining us. And as I said, a lot for India to think about as far as this poll is concerned. And joining us on NDTV now is the former Chief Minister of Delhi, Ms. Sheila Dikshit. If you remember, she was the Chief Minister when that Delhi gang rape happened. And we just go to the rest of the panelists in just a little while. Ma'am, you heard about this perception poll just now. You heard what the Thomson Reuters Foundation was saying about how it was done. What are your first thoughts on this? I mean, it is something that is very, very disappointing and, you know, to hear about where India is perceived in the world today.
No, it's apart from being disappointing, it's very worrying. You see, we have to do something about it. But who is to do something about it? There are government rules and regulations. There is a, a way of looking at things by the courts that are there, but most important, it is society which has to change. You know, as you all know very well, that 76% of the work done in any life in any country is done by the women, and this is how they are treated. I mean, it's a shame. I don't know this thing that has come out, the categories that have come out and what has been said about it. I'm not very familiar with all that, but if this is the picture that the lady has given, it's something very, very worrisome. And not only is the government got to do something or the courts got to do something, it is society which has to give the respect to the women. And I believe in that very strongly, that without, can you imagine a society without women?
No, of course. But, you know, does it surprise you, ma'am? Does it surprise you, ma'am, that India, with all its problems, and clearly, you know, there are issues that we have to deal with when it comes to crimes against women. It's very clear we have a problem. But did it surprise you that India tops the list? I mean, it's more dangerous for women than it is in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Somalia, and all these other countries. Does that surprise you?
Yes, of course it surprised me very much. But you must remember another thing, there are certain strata of society where women are ill-treated, and there is another strata of society, because India is not a society which is, you know, the same everywhere. It changes from religion to caste to areas and all. So, you know, I'm rather disturbed and rather hurt by the fact that India is the worst country where women is concerned.
But when the December 16th gang rape happened and you had this huge outcry and anger in Delhi, and you witnessed that, of course, firsthand, the government at that time decided to bring in a new anti-rape legislation. And looking back on that, there were parts of that law that were applauded, that the Justice Verma committee also, you know, was in agreement with. There were other parts that many felt were a knee-jerk reaction to a terrible crime that had happened. When you look back on that, do you think that law really did enough? And I mean, as you said, it is a much bigger problem that goes beyond the law.
No.
But was that a knee-jerk reaction then at the time, maybe?
No. I agree with you there that it goes beyond law, because very often you find people not, you know, agreeing to it, not coming out with it, because they want to hide it, because they feel ashamed of it. So they don't come out with it. So they don't use the law. So that is a problem. That is because in our society, women tend to be a little shy. So what has happened to them, they don't want to tell anybody about it. So they suffer it in, you know, in quiet. Quietly they suffer the whole thing, and there's nobody else to help them. It happens within households also. You know that very well. So I don't know. So it's not as simple a question, nor as simple an answer to that question as it is made out. Even the Western countries and all the other countries have taken decades and decades to come to the stage where women feel safer than they do in India, for instance.
You know, ma'am, Rahul Gandhi has, you know, tweeted about this, targeting the Prime Minister, saying that it is a shame that India is at the top of this perception poll, and I think all right-thinking Indians would agree that it is a shame. But, I mean, is it fair to sort of blame the current government for this? Because, as you know, and you yourself saw that, this has been a long-standing problem, and maybe one of the sort of bigger problems has been how slow the judicial system has been to respond to cases. I mean, even the December 16th case, which was seemingly open and shut, is not, it's shut. It's still in the Supreme Court.
Look, my dear, who else do you blame? Who else do you put the onus of putting the whole thing right? It's on the government of the day. So when Rahul Gandhi said that, I don't think he was wrong. He expects the government to take certain steps so that this does not recur. Doesn't matter who the government, if it was somebody else, it should have said the same thing.
All right. Well, ma'am, thank you for joining us on NDTV today. Sheila Dikshit, the former Chief Minister of Delhi there, on this explosive perception poll on the status of women in India. And joining us now is social activist Aruna Roy, Lalita Kumaramangalam, who is the former chairperson of the National Commission for Women and is a member of the BJP. Brand strategist Harish Bijur joins us from Bangalore, and Supreme Court advocate Karuna Nandi also joins us today. Aruna Roy, to you first. Your first reaction to this perception poll, ma'am, and the fact that, you know, India tops the list, did that surprise you? All right, we've lost that link with Aruna Roy. Let me take that question to Lalita Kumaramangalam. Lalita.
Well, it shocked me, and I totally don't agree with it. The fact is that reporting in India has gone up over the last few years, and let me say this right at the beginning, that violence against women has really nothing to do with which party is in power or is not in power, for that matter. Some of the facts that the lady who was speaking to at the beginning, the head of the Reuters Foundation, were okay, I mean, one can agree with them. But the rest of them, I mean, they've interviewed 550 odd women who are so-called experts on women's issues, who've given their ideas of it. If you really want the truth, you need to do an ethnographic research, which takes at least a year or two, where you actually talk to victims of abuse, of all types of abuse, whether it's sexual or economic or, you know, anything else. And that's the way you can really arrive at the reality. Now, I don't think they have looked at the rising rates of violence against women worldwide. I don't want to single out any country and say what is, you know, the highest on the list or the lowest on the list. I think it's very unfair to women all over the world when we trivialize it by making it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Every woman who has faced violence, every woman, regardless of color, regardless of race, regardless of anything else, is the one who one needs to talk to, because she is a victim. Today, increasingly, because women are coming out and talking about, you know, their maybe sometimes what happened in the past, who are refusing to accept that they will be victims, they walk out of wherever they feel that they are being oppressed. I think there is a backlash, and this backlash is perhaps what is being seen as a perception of greater violence being inflicted on women. Now, insofar as India is concerned, having been the chairperson of the NCW for 3 years, I can tell you for a fact that reporting has vastly increased. And there's another thing I want to say, this whole thing about genital mutilation. In India, there's only one community that practices it, and they are a very limited number. Whereas in many countries, in West Asia, etc., genital mutilation is almost, you know, I mean, the name of the day almost. And I'm not trying to say they are worse or we are better. The fact is that even such comparisons are odious.
Okay.
Most of these are done, I think, in order to be able to get funds to say we are doing very, very good work here and there.
Okay, so
all of the world.
I think you made some important points, because
singled out.
I
just refuse to do it.
I have to say,
because
I had
think
questions
that's
about the
very
methodology.
Insulting to women.
I had questions about the methodology as well, and we do have Aruna Roy
Yeah,
back with us.
Nidhi, just one more thing, let me say.
Give me 1 second. I just come back to you.
To do with women's empowerment, the moment we politicize it, you just mess up the whole issue.
Well, it got politicized. It's always been politicized.
It's not the answer. I mean, it's not about Congress or BJP or anybody else.
Okay.
It's about all of us acting together.
Aruna Roy, were you surprised that India tops this list?
Is both, you know, the domain of men and women. And to say that it's the BJP or the Congress or or anybody else, I think it's ridiculous.
Okay, ma'am, I'd just like to get Aruna Roy into the discussion. Thank you. Ma'am, yes, go ahead. Were you surprised that India is the most dangerous place in the world for women as per this perception poll?
I am quite surprised, quite honestly, because I travel I travel to many countries, and I don't think it is it's a street violence on the street that is a big problem in India today. More dangerous for us now today is the perpetration of and revival of older values which we women in the 60s fought, and we thought we had put it aside, which are now being revived by people who are going back to fundamental values, fundamentalist values, and these are very frightening. But I think it is not dangerous, but it's certainly a country in which there is a dramatic rise in the number of crimes against women. I think when you use a word like dangerous, you really, if you are not in India, you've never been to this country, you feel nervous stepping onto the soil of this country. You feel that when you step onto it, then there's going to be attacks, which is not quite the case, because there are so many millions of us who walk the streets, who go to offices, who come back, who are quite safe. But the point is that the protection of social values and the protection of the state, both are sliding down. Previously, there used to be a lot of positive response by people in the community, supported no matter what religious group or other communities they belong to. There used to be a general sense of decency which overflew into protection of women. But today, there seems to be, with the other values that are deteriorating, if you can perpetuate violence and hate, then women will also come into that fold of violence and hate. We don't get free from that. And with that is the revival of the woman as a homemaker, that she shouldn't work. All this ideological emphasis that a woman who works is not looking after the family, that a woman who does dresses differently is not quite within the norms of decency. These are all.
Would you say then that the report is alarmist? Do you think the report is alarmist in the way that it projects India and yet, has touched upon some difficult home truths?
But I want to say some things. You see, if India was such a dangerous country, we wouldn't have the enormous numbers of women on the streets, walking, working, going to university, college. That would simply not be possible. So I think when we use phrases, we should be judicious in what we say. And we should really say that actually there is a tremendous increase of sexual crimes. Yes, there is. And for many reasons. Firstly, of course, there are laws which we have now begun to realize that exist. We have also begun to use those laws. We've begun to access those laws. The women are becoming more and more literate. So therefore, the visibility ratio has gone up dramatically. Of course it has. Also, the market and its assault on the sensibilities of people. Wherever you sell anything, a woman is the symbol. Whether you want to sell liquor, or your shoes, or a refrigerator, and everywhere. So women as commodity has really taken over in a large sense with the market economy. So young people who see women, men especially who see women, see them as a commodity. And that also increases the rate of violence on women. So I think to be simplistic about this is very difficult.
I think that's been well said by you. I think that's been very well articulated. Harish Bijur, this is a question I actually asked the Thomson Reuters Foundation CEO as well just now, which was that what does a poll like this then do for the India story? I mean, when the world looks at a poll like this, and this is being reported by the international media widely today, it's a top headline on some websites today. What does that do to India's brand value? The whole, as we try to sell India as this great investment destination, the fastest growing economy in the world, asking people to come and invest, etc., asking tourists to come. What does it do for that?
Well, Nidhi, firstly, it does nothing good at all for India, because it is the worst news that you can talk about, because if India is all that bad to its women, it isn't a great nation. That's what the report is saying. But if you look at the entire thing, it's quite a bit of a shocker, because all of us, you and I, know that India is not so great in managing its gender equity and managing gender, but we never knew we were so bad to be number one. If you look at it, this is a perception poll, and I think we should respect the poll to be what it is. It is a perception of 548 and odd people, and out of them maybe 41 are from India, but this is a poll of experts. And a poll of experts is really about perception. And there are two types of perception. One is a perception which Indians feel about India. The second is a perception of what outsiders feel about India. Now guess what? One is an extrinsic perception. One is an intrinsic perception. The intrinsic perception of India, like all of us will agree, is a great one. We don't feel we are all that bad. But reports such as these, which actually point out and say that, hey, listen, India is the most dangerous country for women, actually paints a very negative image in the extrinsic environment. So when it comes to investments, when it comes to people wanting to work here, people wanting to travel here, tourism, I think it hits it badly. But we need to understand one big thing: perception perception, sadly, is more important than the truth.
Well, I think you're right, because often often perception does end up being more important than the truth. But Karuna Nandi, let's just talk about the issues that this report has raised, and these are issues as a country we do need to seriously look at, whether it is on sexual violence against women, which includes rape, domestic rape, rape by a stranger, sexual harassment. All of that is where India actually ranks number one. Human trafficking, including forced labor, forced marriage, sexual slavery, there also we have this dubious distinction of being number one. Acid attacks, child marriage, forced marriages, physical abuse, female infanticide, there also we rank as number one. The point is that could a perception poll like this actually serve as a wake-up call that we need to look and address these issues far more seriously than we are? I mean, you already have the government saying that this report is rubbish, but do we need to take a step back and say that, look, there are certain important issues it raises. We may not agree with the methodology entirely, but it does raise certain valid points.
This entire panel, Nidhi, has been a very interesting exercise in denial. It's very interesting, right? Because we have a number of people who've been speaking on this panel, whether it's a former chief minister, whether it's, Aruna Roy, who I have huge respect for, and also Lalita Kumaramangalam, who was head of the NCW, and I don't know much about Mihir Bijur, but also Mihir Bijur. Now, we see, let's unpack this. There are a number of levels of denial, right? One is that sexual violence is completely distinct from us being an economic powerhouse. No, it's not at all. We have seen the number of women participating in the workforce actually go down dramatically from 1995, from about 35% to about 28%. Second myth, that sexual violence tends to happen most on the street. Even this perception poll, with its limitations, speaks of the number one mode of violence being cruelty by husbands. I'm leading, as you know, the marital rape case, the constitutionality of marital rape in the Delhi High Court, and we have put forward a lot of extremely reliable data, including the fact that over 90% of the rapes that happen within the home. The greatest violence happens within the home, keeping women at home. 3, that this is not a political issue. This is front and center a political issue. If the economy is a political issue, why should the most fundamental, why should the war against women not be a political issue? When women cast votes, why should women not be choosing between whether it's the BJP, whether it's the Congress, whether it's the Aam Aadmi Party, choosing on the basis of which party promises to do their job? And let us be very clear, and here I completely diverge from Sheila Dikshit ji, which is that this is more a problem for society than government. No, this is not correct. Murder happens in society, dowry happens in society, rape happens in society. The reason that this is a responsibility for government is because government exists in order to protect the freedom of its citizens. And this has been recognized, for example, in the last election, where the Modi government put out various ads, and there were huge banners saying that, when Mr. Modi would come and deal with this issue. Has that happened? Comprehensively, no.
But Karuna, can I ask you to be
now,
fair?
A lot of
What can governments do beyond a point? Because you can legislate.
I'll address that.
You can hope that the judiciary speeds up listening to these cases and there are actually speedy trials. But what do governments do beyond a point if, as we know now statistically, most rapes, for instance, happen within the four walls of our homes?
Okay. Now, what a number of people, including Lalita Kumaramangalam, said quite rightly, is that the reporting level has gone up, which is perhaps one of the reasons why the perception of violence has gone up. I will also say that I think it's a testimony to the success of India's feminist movement, and not just the traditional women's movement, but also people like like you, and people in the media, and people in various in the courts, and people in various aspects of society who take these issues up, that make people that sort of make these issues live in society, right? So this is sort of also proven by the fact that the US is fairly high up there, and after the Me Too movement, so after people start speaking out about this stuff, this is when the perceptions change. And this is also something I think the study acknowledges quite fairly. You said how is this governmental responsibility?
No, I'm saying what can governments do
when we
beyond
talk
a point?
about speeding up cases, okay, so you said that that this is somewhat government's responsibility, but it's a limited responsibility of government, right? If I'm hearing you correctly. You spoke of speedy justice. Justice Lodha, when he was Chief Justice, had an ongoing case, and a number of Chief Justices after that have expressed huge anguish about the fact that we don't have enough judges. Our judges per million, our police per million are among the lowest in the world, lower than many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, first. So therefore, when we talk about speedy justice, when we talk about increased reporting, where is this reporting going? Are these women getting justice? No, they're not. Why are these women not getting justice? Because we don't have enough police, because we don't have enough courts, and also there are problems of patriarchy within these institutions. That is also state responsibility.
Aruna Roy wants to. I think Aruna Roy wants to make a point on that.
Let me just finish my point, Niti.
Yeah.
I've been waiting patiently. Let me just finish my point. Now, at bottom, however, I think the root of sort of dealing with patriarchy is really addressing patriarchal impulses, patriarchal mindsets, changing the incentives, right? The changing the incentives happens through swift and certain convictions. That's something I've already spoken of. But if we don't, public education campaigns actually work. Campaigns in schools, campaigns in workplaces actually work. So if government takes this up, which they have failed to comprehensively, if you look at the sloganeering of the BJP and what actually happened, and match it to the manifesto, which only had one brief sloppy page.
Okay, so Karuna, you made a couple of very important points. I just want to take that to Aruna Roy for a minute, because what Karuna Nandi says about public campaigns, etc., is a very significant point. But there is also how, if we have to hold the political class responsible, Aruna Roy, then they also have to be accountable for their own public behavior, whether it is on the internet, whether it is on remarks that party leaders make, and misogynist remarks, and really get away with it. And therefore, I think the political class sort of needs to lead by example and say that this is not okay.
Actually, India is too vast a country, and we have too many classes, castes, we have communities. When we make any generalization about India, it is very difficult. So, having said that, let me tell you that all governments are responsible up to a point for increasing violence against women. There is a mandate that they must stop it. The patriarchy in police stations, the patriarchy in courts, the patriarchy in all regulatory mechanisms is so high that a woman who goes for justice normally doesn't get it. And this is true today in India. And it's also accentuated by the fact that more and more people are now aware of what their rights are. Governments have a basic responsibility, I've always felt, to either promote or reduce or curtail or control such crimes. And I think in the last 3 or 4 years, there has been a rhetoric which has not been put into action at all. There's been plain and only rhetoric, and there have been systematic assaults on women who belong to minorities, women who belong to Dalit communities, specifically targeted as well. And I think we must take this into consideration, because women without class or caste or community in India don't make any sense. We have to take into consideration which community of beings is more attacked, which community of beings is less attacked. Rural India has seen far more reported rapes in the last 5 to 6 years than it has ever before. They used to be scared of rapes, now they make the cases, but very often it ricochets against the victim because of mobilization of the majority community. Normally it's a rape of somebody who's weak. All rape occurs because it's a show of power. So a man who is from a majority community, who is a powerful community, rapes a woman who belongs to a less powerful or a minority community. In all these cases, when the law begins to take its course, society, community mobilizes for the perpetrator of the violence rather than the victim, as happened in Kashmir, as happened in Dalit issues. So I think what really is completely shocking is that the system, the government, just stands and watches and doesn't take action against people who are absolutely violating every legal norm in the country by talking for people who perpetrate crime.
I think that's a very, very important point. Lalita Kumaramangalam, wouldn't you say that that is something that then does fall under any government's responsibility, whoever may be in power?
That I agree with totally, that governments also have their own responsibility towards the security of women. But politics is not the way to go about changing patriarchy in this country, unfortunately. Once the blame game, we start playing it, the issue is totally submerged, subverted and just buried. That is what I've been saying for years. Every government does have a responsibility to all its citizens. This is a democracy. Regardless of what party you belong to, once you're elected, you're elected for the whole community. Majority,
That's
minority, powerful,
the Women's
powerless,
Reservation Bill is directly
I
tied
agree
to
with
violence
that.
against women.
But
the
what
political
we need
parties
to do,
not giving tickets to women.
Can I please speak without being interrupted?
Go ahead.
The lady who's trying to speak over me asked not to be interrupted. Can I just finish? After that, ma'am, you can speak.
Go ahead.
I have no problem with that. Let me finish. Otherwise, I mean, I'll shut up and you can say what you want.
No, Lalita Kumaramangalam, go ahead.
No, please finish.
Okay, now it is the responsibility of every government. I agree. The problem also today in India is not just that there are too few courts. The police station is the first sort of barrier to any woman who goes to complain about violence. The police are poorly equipped, poorly trained. We hardly have any forensic labs. And considering that, I mean, it's some 70 years odd after independence, it's a shame on all the governments. We need to have forensic labs in every district. Women have been sexualized too much, whether it's on the internet, whether it's India and abroad. Women have become sort of like objects. And, unfortunately, with this explosion of information that has come in with the internet, patriarchy has almost got, many steps up the ladder. Those who are fighting against it, like Aruna Roy pointed out, those who are fighting against it in the 60s and 70s, find that the situation, the patriarchy in this country, seems to have become more embedded in people, and not just in men, in women too. There needs to be sustained campaigns against patriarchy also. We are always only blaming men. It's not true.
Which is why I'm saying that political leaders across the board have to also then lead by example.
Women too.
Yeah, which is why I'm saying that political leaders across the board also have to lead by example.
Look, for 25 years we haven't been able to get the women's reservation bill in parliament through. What does it say about all our parties? Unfortunately, patriarchy is so deeply embedded in this country that, I mean, it has nothing to do with party you come from.
Just
yes,
have a minute
it is
left.
to do with power. All violence is an exercise of the power over the powerless.
Harish Bijou.
Right.
Harish, yes.
Well, I will put it this way. When I look at this report, it is a shocker. But then, I don't think any of us should live in denial. We need to address the issue, and we need to say that, hey, listen, this is a clarion call to wake up, because I think things aren't as they should be. But living in denial is certainly wrong. But at the same time, we need to appreciate that, this is the soft underbelly of India. India scores high on every count. But when it comes to gender and women and the way we take care of our women, or disparities, etc., I think we are very poor. And I think we need to address this soft underbelly issue.
All right, well, lots to talk about. This report really has been quite explosive, and it's certainly given us a lot to think about. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us on NDTV this evening. Thank you very much.